Well, Antony Loewenstein is the author of The Palestine Laboratory on Israel's Arms and Surveillance Industry. Joins us now from Sydney. Good to have you with us. So, Antony, let's start with the war bill. The estimates that I've been looking at, anywhere from 100 to 220 million US dollars a day. How sustainable is that?
In the short term, it is. And I say that because the Israeli economy is obviously hugely boosted by the US. And in fact, Biden is currently, although it hasn't got through Congress yet, is trying to send huge amounts of money to Israel, which is partly weapons, but also partly financial support to increase the annual aid that Israel receives. So in the short to medium term, I would say it's sustainable in inverted commas for Israel. But the longer term, if this goes on in its current form, for 6 months, 12 months or beyond, it's not. But I'm not convinced that it will go like it is for that amount of time.
All right, so the costs, especially in the long term, will be mounting. But perhaps one industry that's bucking the trend and talk of losses is the Israeli defense industry, right?
Absolutely. You know, in November, the Elbit, which is Israel's largest defense company, its CEO, did a conference call with various people and said that their bottom line is doing very well, particularly from the Israeli military. And, you know, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February, about, I guess, 2 years ago or so now, Israeli sales to European nations, missile defense shields, other weapons, has soared. In fact, just a few months ago, Israel sold to Germany its biggest defense deal ever. It was $3.5 billion US of a missile defense shield. So that is in some ways going to buttress potential headwinds for Israel moving forward. And I suspect what Israel's been doing since October 7, as I've been documenting and others have too, that they've been battle testing various weapons in the field in Gaza, both for domestic audiences but also international. A lot of those weapons will be sold to other nations in the coming months and years. So a few months ago, we found out the 2022 figures for Israeli arms sales. It was $12.5 billion US, which was the biggest ever. Pretty confident that the figures for 2023, which we'll get in about 6 months, will be very high as well, because all those European states, Arab states and Asian states are desperate for Israeli weapons, defense equipment and spyware. And I don't think October 7 is going to have any impact on any of that.
They say follow the money, Antony, and when you do, it's not only Israeli defense companies that are looking at a profit out of this war and this conflict. I'm looking at a statement by Mr. Aiken, who's the Chief Financial Officer and Executive Vice President of General Dynamics, October 28th, saying, I think the Israel situation is only going to put upward pressure on that demand. A buck to be made by US and global arms manufacturers from the Gaza war?
Well, hugely. And in 2022, the global arms sales were $2.2 trillion, which was a record figure. That was obviously about the war in Ukraine, particularly. Now, this year, or should I say 2023, those figures will come out, I guess, soon. Israel, Gaza, to be sure, the war in Ukraine, huge amounts of companies, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Elbit in Israel, a lot of European defense companies are making an absolute killing. Now, these wars are not started by defense companies, of course, but they are definitely backed by them hugely. And when CEOs make comments like that in very kind of corporate type language, what they're saying is, we want war to continue. And with the US sending, just in the last week or so, huge amounts of more weapons to Israel, when Antony Blinken and Biden bypassed any kind of congressional oversight, those weapons have to come from somewhere. They're coming from US stock. And a lot of American companies are in overtime to provide weapons to Ukraine, certainly in the past, and now Israel. So all those companies are making a fortune. And in fact, what it says is that global conflict is worsened, of course, by this. The weapons companies claim that arms somehow make the world safer, which is complete nonsense. It's the opposite effect. So Israel, I think, will be, inverted commas, fine for a while in terms of weapons and being provided by the US. But longer term, economically, they might have some serious trouble.
Just a brief one, because the Israeli military talked about getting, when they announced the reservists, some of the reservists being brought back, did reference getting people back to jobs in the economy. What's the effect of the reservists, particularly on the tech industry, getting them out of the tech industry and onto the front lines in Gaza?
Well, essentially, it means that they can't do their work to develop new forms of technology and often, frankly, also weapons. I mean, when Israel talks about the tech sector, it's not just weapons or spyware, but a big section of it is. And those companies are a huge part of their impetus and reasoning is using the occupation as a testing ground, which has been the case for decades. And that's accelerated since October 7. So when those workers cannot be in Tel Aviv or elsewhere doing that work, they cannot be testing and researching for new weapons and technology. Israel needs that to bolster its economy. But also, as I said, it's not just about a financial aspect. It's also the idea that Israel sells the concept of getting away with it. And what I mean by that is huge amounts of nations around the world before October 7, and certainly I'm sure we'll see this year since October 7, see Israel as a model in how to actually use weapons on minorities they don't like. And Israel sells not just the technology to do that, but the philosophy of how to get away with that internationally at the UN or elsewhere. So Israel is going to be pretty keen to get some of those workers back into business.
All right. I wish we had more time. Always good talking to you, Antony Loewenstein.
Thanks, Sammy.